Hey, and we are back with the MMA Prospectus for a week where we actually have a UFC event to talk about. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, like a blast from the past. And I am joined this week with by my normal, average, regular. I don't know. It's not a really very stellar introduction, is it? My very special
Hi
co-host
everyone,
of the
I'm
week.
Tom Grant.
There you go, Tom Grant.
Yeah.
Have to take over those duties. Self introductions. Anyway, we've got a shitload of stuff to go over this week. Really, probably more than will fit in the show. There were a bunch of prospects fought last week. Um, there's not a lot of guys fighting this week, actually, but we've got some other stuff to talk about to go with it. We're going to keep, because we've had to stall our scouting report as we've ended up just, both way too busy to keep up with the kind of heavy investment that takes. We're going to go over some more of the fighters that we've scouted that we weren't able to publish reports on yet, talk a little bit about them, give them a little bit of an introduction via the show, do that a little more often, make that a bigger part of what we do. So that we're doing a little more of that, talk about some of these fights coming up, talk about some of these fights past, a lot to go over. First and foremost, we got this UFC show coming up, and frankly, there is not much on it in terms of guys to be excited about.
No, I mean, if you're just looking at it from a non-prospect point of view, like Gegard Mousasi, Uriah Hall should be fun.
Yeah,
Though you get two guys in there who have issues with being aggressive at times, and you put them in the same cage, and you could get a staring contest.
yeah.
But prospect-wise, not a lot going on there. Not a lot happening on the undercard there.
No, really not. I mean, the top 3 or 4 fights on that card, maybe, I mean, the top 5, really the main card should be fun, except for that Hirota Ishihara bout, which could or could not be. But Kikuno Brandao will be fun. Mizugaki Roop will be fun. Horiguchi Camus will be fun. And then Musashi Hall, might be. And then Barnett Nelson should be fun. So, like, the card itself should be good, but we're basically just have to talk about who's new on this card because we're not talking about anybody that's a real blue chipper.
No, no.
Um,
And this is partially what we talked about before, man. The Japanese scene's not good right now.
mm-mm. It's and I've heard even some people say that there aren't that many young fighters participating as there used to be, and I don't know about that. Like, I mean, maybe not. Maybe I still think that the participation is there in general. Like, we keep seeing young fighters go through, and occasionally we get a guy like Horiguchi or um who are the 2 bantamweight Japanese fighters that they signed recently? I'm
Oh,
totally.
I'm not. The names are escaping me, and I'm generally speaking, when it comes to Japanese names, I do everyone a service by not saying them aloud.
Yeah. I'm trying to just pull this up, but anyway, we've seen like a few guys get out of the scene with good records, come to the UFC, compete a little. I think they're young fighters competing, but it just seems like they're not getting good enough training to compete over here.
That's, I think, the common thing you see. Even looking back to the golden era of Japanese MMA, there weren't a ton of really good fighters that were hailing from Japan. There were a couple. There were a couple really physical, really good grappling, grapplers coming out of Japan. But generally speaking, you didn't have a lot of like all-round technicians coming out of there. Even greats like, Takanori Gomi or Kazushi Sakuraba. Sakuraba, amazing grappler, one of the best of all time. Maybe you term his striking game as serviceable, but it was serviceable for the time. Today it would be terrible. I mean,
Yeah,
so it's one of those things that the Japanese scene didn't really follow the jump of the metagame when the focus of the sport became North America. Because the
yeah,
game changed quite a bit.
yeah. It has. It's Ulka Sasaki and Michinori Tanaka both of whom have had major problems with more physical wrestlers and with aggressive striking.
Hmm.
Um, but so every now and then they still they still push out a young prospect here and there who has some potential, but it just like the guy on this card, Teruto Ishihara. Watching some tape on him, watching him on the show, most particularly, he looks like he's a good physical athlete. Looks fast. Looks like he's got good physical tools. Especially, he looks like a very competent counter wrestler.
Hmm.
But his all the like little pieces of his game are just not there. Like he looks, he suffers from exactly what we see out of a lot of these guys, which is that he's always waiting for that perfect strike. You
Yeah.
know, it's fainting without the actual venom or the act without the actual strikes to back it up.
Yeah,
Um,
he kind of seems to have kind of that karate style of striking where he's setting up one strike and he's looking, like you said, for that perfect strike. And then when he throws it, it's really not. It doesn't usually turn out to be a devastating blow. Um, Decent counter wrestler on the ground. He's pretty much an escape and stand up sort of guy. And like you said, I think he's a fine athlete. I put him at like about average for the UFC in athleticism.
mhm.
So could be a solid fighter, but I think he's going to get beat up on the feet at times, and that's his A game. And there are definitely going to be guys who can take him down. So he'll hang around in the UFC for a little while. He'll probably fight on, he'll probably fight on Eastern Hemisphere fights cards.
Well, that depends if he actually makes it to the UFC. Because this
Oh,
bout
right,
with Hirota, like I'm not, the way they advertised it, at least at the beginning of the season, is that this is for one contract. Like that whole season was for one UFC contract.
right. I honestly had forgotten. Even though we just talked about it like an hour ago, I had totally forgotten about the road to UFC Japan tough thing they did.
Yeah. So, and in front of him, Hirota is like, every serviceable grinder in the world. He's a decent high output boxer, a decent grinding wrestler, a capable grappler. He's exactly the kind of guy that could easily beat somebody like Teruto Ishihara, who's always sitting there looking for the one strike that's going to win him the fight.
Yeah,
And if he does, I mean, you get somebody in Hirota back who's 10 years in the sport and who went basically I don't, he went to a decision with Pat Healy in Strikeforce and then a decision against Ronnie Yaya and a decision against Rodrigo Dam. And I don't see anything out of his game that would make me think that him coming back is going to change that.
no, no. It's just again we come back to this decision like, man, why do they keep rolling out the tough format? Like I get, like we kind of talked about this, and you made a solid point that it usually works once in a market.
Yep.
But how much interest is there going to be in Japan in an American style uh, reality show?
I have no fucking clue, honestly.
It
Zero.
doesn't seem like this sort of niche that MMA occupied in their popular culture previous to like the decline of the Japanese MMA boom. So I don't know. It just seems like a weird choice to do like just
Well,
do the cookie cutter tough show for like this one card.
the UFC had like I think they are probably they're more interested in Japan than fans think they are. I think there's this tendency to be like, oh well, nobody's really interested in putting on shows in Japan or getting Japanese fighters or anything like that. And I'd say the UFC is way more interested than the market would necessarily, like the talent market supports.
Mm-hmm.
They are going in there, putting on shows, as we see, trying to get guys off of contracts and get whatever fighters they can for their cards. And and I think that part of it is that because that market is so well established and it's been around for so long, a lot of guys are under long-term contract. They've already gone to ONE FC. They've already gone to Road. They're even, if they're in Pancrase or Deep or Shudo, they've got a deal that the UFC would have to buy out to get them. And the UFC's not really, that's not something they do a lot of. Mostly, I think they tend to want guys who are free agents.
Yeah.
They don't want a lot of hassle for talent. And so they put together this show because that show is really the tough format is the only thing they have when it comes to opening a new market. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it's their single tool.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem like they got anything out of it this time at all.
No, and I think that's becoming there's most definitely diminishing returns on the tough format.
So the other fight, I mean, the only fighter of any real note on this card is a prospect, and I mean, we are reaching way out for our definition of prospect at this point, is Li Jinglong.
Yeah, he's. Hold on one second. It's Yijing Long. He's actually kind of an interesting fighter in that he's a decent athlete and his wrestling and grappling's like average level. Like it's fairly solid. It's just not good enough to be an offensive tool in the UFC. And so he's building kind of a boxing and low kick game to complement it.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny because when his nickname is the Leech, and when he was on the Asian regional circuit, like you look at his record and it's submission, guillotine, a TKO, technical submission, guillotine, decision, submission. And that's who he was. He was this grinding submission guy who would jump on you, latch onto you, and just force you into this long grinding war of attrition. Thus the Leech. I mean, that he would just suck the life out of you. And in the UFC, like he's not a physical force enough to latch on to guys.
Yeah.
Guys can stuff that part of his game. And so he's really remarkably quickly adapted a good enough boxing game to win fights, predicated largely on the fact that he's tough as shit.
Yeah.
Like, he's just got a great chin, and he's willing to go in, eat a few shots, and work at a high pace to get wins. He's figured that out. So, it's hard to say how that'll serve him long term. It certainly made him a much, at 2-1, he's already putting together a better record than most of the fighters that the UFC has pulled out of China. And
yeah, he's actually been like, I'd have to look at it. He's sitting at what, like at 2-1 as a UFC fighter, like the most successful Chinese fighter they've had so far.
They've had, let's see, I'm trying to, there's a couple guys. Ning Guangyu is at 2-0.
Oh yeah.
Down at bantamweight, but he's also actually beat a much lower level of competition to get to 2-0.
Honestly, the fight with Taleb, he was fairly competitive in.
Yeah.
Even though he lost in that one, he was fairly competitive in that one. Then lost a split decision. He had a nice head and arm throw at one point.
Yep.
Really, I felt like that was the fight where he really started trotting out the boxing game.
Pretty much. I think he tried to be the grappler against David Michaud, and that Michaud showed him that he can't make that work at this level.
Yeah.
And then after that, he immediately said, well, okay, if I can't be the more powerful, bigger, stronger grappler like I was on the Chinese regional circuit, I gotta do something else. And he's molded his game well to fit that. But yeah, otherwise they cut who was the other guy the tough China welterweight finalist? They just cut him. I can't remember his name now.
Yeah, who was the original China? Who's the first Chinese fighter? The Mr. Guillotine.
Oh, God.
The name's escaping me, but I have vivid memories of him going.
Tiquan Zhang.
Yes.
That was the first the first Chinese fighter they signed, and he has de facto retired. He's 2-4. He's still with the UFC, but he's just like a liaison. I think he was supposed to be a talent liaison, as like, you know, involved with the first Tough China season and all that, but they've just kind of abandoned their whole Chinese operation.
Yeah.
And then Wong Sai was probably their best Chinese fighter they went out and found, but I think he honestly just decided to. I mean, he just basically cut out of his UFC contract in the middle of it, and they said, "Well, we can't really do anything because he's in China. Like, we don't have any jurisdiction to go over there and get him."
Yeah.
And
yeah, it does seem like the UFC has, for the most part, like been scaling back how much they want to do in China, which I think
nothing. I think they're nothing at this point.
Yeah, which is probably a good call at this point because it's very much kind of like we've talked about before. If the Chinese government doesn't want to do it and doesn't want the sport to be a thing, it's not really going to be a thing.
Yeah. You really need the support of you need a lot of bureaucratic support there to make that happen, and it doesn't seem like there is any. And like I say, I mean, the only formula the UFC really has shown to date in developing markets is tough.
Yeah.
So if tough doesn't work, then they don't have a second. They don't have a step two.
Yeah. As a quick production aside, live on air, do I need to shut my windows? Because apparently today is like lawn cutting day for like everyone who lives by me, and I'm getting tons of noise. You're not hearing any of that?
No, I'm not hearing it.
Okay, that's good because it's annoying the heck out of me.
All right. Well, you're fine as far as I know.
Should I just go to the windows and shout at people?
Sure. Yeah, you could do that.
Like, I'm recording a very important MMA blog show over here.
This is true. Absolutely. So, yeah, that's. Other than that, on this show, I mean, Kaita Nakamura is well into his 30s, has a ton of experience. Yusuke Kasuya is honestly just seems like filler to make Nick Hine look good.
Yeah, I went back and watched a couple of his fights, and I mean, he's gotten wins, but they haven't been good. Like,
no.
You know, his most recent one in Pacific Extreme Combat, he was basically getting wailed on, and then like took Frank Camacho's back and choked him out like really quickly. Like decent grappler, like on the mat. Once he gets on the mat, he's a decent grappler, but he's not a very good striker and not a very good wrestler.
He's a fantastic opportunist and a really good at finding submissions in scrambles, but he's really bad at initiating scrambles.
He is a prototypical regional submission guy. That's what it seems like to me. I could be wrong, and maybe he runs off like 3 total victories in the UFC, but he kind of seems like the dude that's going to collect a lot of submission wins on the regional circuit, and then when you step him up, he's not going to be able to do it against a higher level of fighter.
Oh, and also there's Shinso Anzai versus Roger Zapata, and I'm just gonna say right off, I have no idea what this fight's gonna look like, and I am not even interested in scouting it. Anzai lost to Alberto Mina by knockout, in his debut, which, if you have seen Alberto Mina's record, knockout isn't exactly. I mean, like, he's had a couple TKOs, but he's a submission dude.
So the real question is for Anzai. Will Reebok provide him with a singlet to wear?
I hope so.
Yeah,
that would be awesome.
That would be amazing.
It would. I doubt they will.
No, because Reebok doesn't do fun.
No. And then Roger Zapata is a tough cast-off who is finally, after years of injury and being on the show, making his UFC debut. He last fought in 2013, so I really have no idea what the hell that fight's going to look like.
Nope.
It's also been more than a year since Anzai fought and made his debut too. So
yeah,
that's just kind of one of those weird fights that anything could come out of it.
Uh-oh.
What?
Sorry, I had a little hiccup. I thought everything had crashed.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, so in the interest of moving things along, let's talk about this Bellator show coming up here. few fighters I want to look at on here. Honestly, a lot more interesting talent if you're looking for prospects.
Yep.
A lot more fighters to be really excited about. First up, obviously, is longtime successful heavyweight kickboxing vet Everton Teixeira at heavyweight. He's 33, but as we've talked about time and again, and especially at heavyweight, like age is so often just a number in MMA.
Here's why, like right up front, why Teixeira is going to be successful at heavyweight to a certain degree is because the dude has the cardio to go 3 rounds at a reasonable pace of volume.
Yeah.
Like that right there means he's going to do pretty well at heavyweight.
And against Kira's, his first opponent, Kira's loves to brawl. Is like a very willing sit in the pocket and brawl kind of guy. So, and heavyweight's got a ton of those. A ton of those. If Bellator can manage to share right, keep him in fights with other dudes who just want to who think that they're all like the heaviest handed, hardest punching guy on the planet, they could put together a really nice run for him and have him as a fun top tier guy for them.
Yeah. Yeah, no, Teixeira's going to be the kind of dude that, like you said, the kind of heavyweights that revel in the fact that they can get away with stuff because they're big and strong in the gym. He's going to eat those kind of guys up.
Yeah.
The big question for Teixeira is what's he going to look like in there against a halfway decent MMA fighter? Because he's got 3 wins on his record. Basically, all of them were against opponents who basically stood in there and acted as human heavy bags for him.
Well, but it's heavyweight MMA. I mean, there are 10 halfway decent MMA fighters in the whole
yeah, no, I'm talking. We're talking. His first 3 fights in MMA, were extra level. The guys just stood there and accepted their beatings to a certain degree.
Kira's will be a bit. He is a big step up in that way.
Yes, and as you said, there's maybe 10 dudes who qualify as really good heavyweights, but there are levels to. There are levels to heavyweight just like any other division. And Teixeira's jumping up a couple of them in this fight. What's he going to look like on the ground? That's the other question. If he gets taken down, it's going to happen eventually. Will he be utterly clueless, or will he be able to? Because I believe Teixeira works with Junior Dos Santos. He started training with Dos Santos, and that's what got him into MMA. Will he somehow through osmosis pick up Dos Santos' hips to just shoot him out and stand back up? It'll be interesting to see. And if nothing else, the dude puts volume on people and puts really hard strikes very accurately on people.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do, and I hope he's protected for long enough to build up some confidence and start getting him into some really flashy, fun fights.
Yeah. Yep.
So
I was gonna say, you can see in his other fights when he builds up confidence, he really let combos go, and it's going body head, mixing in hard kicks, high, low, into the body. He's gonna be a fun fighter to watch, regardless of how elite he ends up being of an MMA fighter.
Yeah. So other guys, I mean, there's a lot of young, super raw young talent on this Bellator card that we're not going to go over. A lot of undefeated guys, a lot of guys that are 4-1, 3-0, stuff like that. But just to talk about a couple other guys that we've already had time to look at a bit. One of the big one making his Bellator debut and against good competition here is Glariston Santos. And, he was highlighted a couple years ago now by Pat Wyman as one of his, top potential sort of, championship caliber prospects in the world. And he's unfortunately just kind of, I don't know if I want to, it's not maybe mismanagement, but it feels like he has missed a window. And for him to only finally get to Bellator now, 10 years into his career, even if he's only 27, he's a very complete, very good fighter, very good athlete, but it's basically just you have to win all your big fights right now.
Yeah, I know he's kind of painted himself into a corner into a certain degree. Because I mean, we're talking about this guy 2 years ago as being ready for a step up into a higher level of competition, and it's very much, you don't want to say mismanagement, but what have you been doing for the last 2 years? Like, your name's been out there, people know who you are. Why, like, you have to imagine he'd be able to get on some card, step up as an injury replacement or something. And, maybe it was visa issues, but I mean, UFC's coming down to Brazil frequently enough that you should be able to get work down there. You can usually work something out with, Bellator is pretty good at bringing guys in country. Like, you're not really sure what's been holding this guy back.
Yeah, even like ONE FC might have been a better way to go than. I mean, Titan FC is nice and all, but he spent 20. He spent all of 2014 in there, got 2 fights, won them both, and it just. I mean, what it partially is too is it's this. One of the things we see out of Brazilian fighters, a lot of them, is that because they start their careers in Brazil when they're like 16 or 15, they develop this long fight heavy pro career in Brazil before they ever break out into a broader market.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you hope that they then have more left in the tank than they should. But a lot of times it's just like, well, you had this long career already, and now you're going to come out and try and make it big and try and make something happen. And sports usually tend to work that way.
You're 10 years into your career and you have over 30 fights.
Yeah.
Like that you're not a prospect anymore to that degree. You're a veteran.
Yeah. So at that, I hope that Santos can make a run in Bellator, because I think by the time he's 30, he's going to fall off really quickly. Yeah, like somewhere in these next 3 or 4 years. And he's fighting John Macapa Teixeira, who is actually, fewer years into his career, has only been fighting since 2007. Very good, hard-nosed vet, has already been successful in Bellator. So tough, fun debut for Glariston Santos.
Yep.
I'm hoping he looks good and can climb quickly. Otherwise, the other big fight between prospects on this card to look at and watch out for is Darian Caldwell versus Sean Bunch.
Yes.
Has a belt, even though he's been a Bellator fighter for a while, his whole career now, we really have not seen a lot of Bunch.
No, and it's really hard to find fight tape of him at this point because Bellator has it kind of all locked down for the most part. But I mean, this is going to be a fun fight just because you're dealing with two really outstanding wrestlers. I mean, both of these guys were, in addition to being NCAA champions and All-Americans, were out there making national teams for the U.S. freestyle and trying to make an Olympic dream come true. Caldwell was really derailed by injury, if I'm recalling correctly. His wrestling career kind of got cut short by injury, and Bunch came up short, like, for the Olympic team. We're talking, like, was the first guy not on the team, I think, 3 Olympic cycles.
Yeah.
It was definitely 2. He wrestled off for 1 Olympic spot and lost. So we're talking about 2 really, really high-level wrestlers making the transition. Bunch has the advantage of training with American Kickboxing Academy. I'm not sure. The more we hear about the AKA, maybe training there is not such a great idea, but it is a high-level gym that does get people ready for fights when it doesn't break them.
Yeah, I mean, they make good fighters. Guys get skill at AKA.
Yes, it is a samurai life there, but you definitely pick up the skills necessary. If your body holds together, you pick up the necessary skills to perform at a high level. Darian Caldwell, just a really natural athlete. Caldwell, like, his footwork isn't like technically perfect all the time, but it looks so natural to him that you would think he had been doing some sort of striking art more than 3 years at this point.
Yeah, and I expect this is kind of a step down for Caldwell, frankly. I mean, Bunch is, he's developing. He's a good athlete. He's got a great wrestling pedigree, and he may be able to make this fight more difficult on Caldwell just because he can meet him skill for skill. But we aren't seeing anything out of Bunch that, like, we aren't seeing Bunch's tape, and I don't, I'm not hearing anybody talk about Sean Bunch, the Uber prospect.
I'm not either. So that to me says that while he's got the credentials, that maybe it's just, we talk Bellator grabs a lot of high level wrestlers now, but it seems like they're not really sure always how to bring them along.
But I mean, with Caldwell, they've done a fantastic job.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think they've done a good job with Bunch too. Like, they seem, with a lot of these guys, they do seem to be bringing them along quietly. Mm-hmm. It's just, they've had some notable setbacks in trying to do that, because they tend to grab wrestlers really raw who have like almost no MMA training, and then try to give them some legit matchups and not just feed them a bunch of cans and let them train a while.
Yes. I mean, like, it feels like they want to grab these guys before they make a name, before they're fighting the UFC for them. But then they want to maintain their integrity as a promotion and give these guys tough fights when you're talking about a dude who, like, who is Bunch's loss? He's fighting Steve Garcia.
Yeah, who's still undefeated, I believe. He's on this card. Yeah, he's at 5-0.
Oh, no, yeah, I was gonna say he's actually not. I was thinking of somebody else. No, Garcia is actually a fairly good matchup for like a guy where you get two young guys. But who did they give who was their
Bubba Jenkins? They gave LaRue Burley.
Yes, that was the one. Bubba Jenkins. They gave some really tough fights early in his career, where it's like you're giving a guy who's like 2 years into his career really, really tough fights.
Yeah, and then they ended up feeding him Georgie Karkanyan, which was a total mistake. I mean, that was Burley was like a similarly recorded, similarly experienced fighter that he was expected to beat, frankly. But there was no reason that anybody should have ever expected him to beat Georgie Karkanyan.
No,
and it does seem like they're having to figure out, like, well, how long is it going to take these guys to get ready? And as we've discussed before, for fighting somebody like Karkanyan, that's like 5 or 6 years. That's how long that it takes to get ready for a fight like that.
That's like your fight before you're ready to step up to fighting like ranked opponents.
Well, and even Karkanyan's like, he's a top 15, 20 level guy. Like,
like he's the bottom. Like, oh, so you want to fight top 20 dudes? Well, here's the 20th dude in the world. See what you can do with them.
So I have a lot more faith in Caldwell. Like, I've watched tape on him. I've watched him fight, and he looks like he has all the tools.
He looks like an MMA native.
Yeah.
He looks like a dude who gets how MMA is fought and is adapting his wrestling pretty well. My biggest thing with him right now is that he is he gets guys down and he's got great pressure, but he's very much like a hang out in the guard and wait for the other guy to make the first move sort of grappler right now. And he doesn't really have that dynamism on the ground. But I mean, like, we're talking about, them getting the fight with Rafael Silva could have easily been one of those fights where we're like, what was Bellator doing with a young wrestler with like less than 3 years in his career getting in there against a dude like Rafael Silva? And Caldwell ground him out. Like, he dug deep and came up with an ugly but, good win.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kind of win that puts Caldwell on a surefire prospect track. That's the kind of win where it's like you went out and you got a tough win that you probably weren't supposed to get. And that's like the mark of what really makes a guy, where you can start looking and saying, this guy, if he keeps at it, he keeps training and he keeps improving, he will be a very good fighter.
Yep.
So that's about all we want to talk about from Bellator. There's not a lot else going on that card. It's still, I mean, that's more than we can say about the UFC, frankly, where we're just talking about, like, hey, how bad are these fighters they've brought in?
They're putting UFC's putting an event on to make there be something on before UFC 192 next weekend. I mean, that's a pretty clear strategy there. Is put an event on to give fight fans something to watch, and then be like, oh yeah, 192 is next weekend. You know, show a bunch of ads, get people fired up,
and get fighters fights. I mean, they've I think they're trying to still keep everybody busy with this massive roster that they have.
Is this one a Fight Pass card, or is this no? This is a Fox Sports 1 card.
Is it?
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's a Fox Sports 1,
that's right.
And then the prelims are on Fox Sports 2, which thank you Fox Sports 2, because they still are not on Comcast here in Chicago. Still, I was told 2 years ago they were gonna when I called Comcast. Yeah, we'll have them on in like a month.
Yeah.
2 years later.
Fox Sports 2 is a nothing channel. I forget it. I don't even, I wouldn't even know it existed if it weren't for the fact that they put UFC prelims on there.
At least Fox Sports Go finally works, with Comcast, so I can sometimes watch stuff there, but then sometimes they black it out because Fox Sports 2 isn't available in your area, so you're not allowed to have it.
Yeah.
Then what's the point? Then what's the point of Fox Sports Go?
Yeah, it's true. All right. So Bellator, UFC, those are the guys we're looking at this week. Let's talk about a couple of prospects that we wanted to highlight before we look at guys from last week, because there were a ton of fights last week, and that's, recapping is recapping. It's much less important than looking at new fighters.
Yeah.
We had two names that we wanted to take a look at. It was Luke Sanders and Murat Kalimov.
So when I put together the bantamweight scouting that I did, Sanders was my number 4 guy for bantamweight, and he reminds me very strongly of Benson Henderson in a lot of ways. Partially, I mean, he's training out of the MMA lab, so it's a very easy comparison to make. But I mean, you're just talking about a dude who has Henderson's motor. He's just always working. He's really aggressive. He's always pushing the pace, if not the most technical fighter. He's always trying to keep the volume up and keep the other guy working. And then there's some real craft to his wrestling. He's actually a really skilled wrestler. And he's got some really nice striking in the clinch. He enters the clinch with really nice knees. And on the ground, he's also pretty crafty. So it's kind of that, he's kind of that all-around fighter that's going to probably eke out a lot of decisions, and then occasionally finish guys with a really nice transition on the ground or a perfect strike. But the kind of guy that's definitely going to keep climbing the ranks through sheer attrition of his opponents.
Yeah, I actually would almost, thinking about it, compare him to Diego Sanchez. I mean, in a better wrestler than Diego Sanchez, but that same just kind of really tough and really aggressive.
Yeah.
And willing to bank on that toughness in order to be aggressive.
I think Diego Sanchez carries with him a lot of baggage of just utter willingness to exchange with no thought to yourself, and just incredibly low fight IQ that I'm not sure if it was Sanders, but I think
he was a top 5 title contender in his prime.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Diego Sanchez at his best was still, a top tier fighter.
Yeah. And if people want to watch some Luke Sanders, you can type him into the Google search, and he's in the RFA right now, and they put out a couple of his fights on YouTube for free. So, you can check him out. He's 10-0 right now, fighting out of the MMA lab, which the lab I think we both agree it's a camp where a lot of guys come out of it and they're not this most technically sound in any phase. But they all tend to be aggressive, and they all tend to be in really good shape.
I tend to, I don't know. I don't like the lab. It's a fight ready camp, is I guess how I would describe it. It's a notch below Alliance and Jackson's.
It's a tier below the elite camps.
Yeah.
You can get the occasional elite fighter out of it, but the level of fighter they produce normally is not on the level with a with like a King's MMA or an AKA or something like that.
Yeah, it just doesn't, like, I see a lot of people going there and I don't see them improving a lot. Like, I see them becoming more fit or, maybe more active, being able to have better cardio, some things like that. And maybe some small improvements here and there, but I don't see like major jumps in wrestling technique or striking technique or anything like that.
It's the kind of camp that's going to produce guys, and then they're going to move on when they reach the higher level to other places, more so than the place where high level guys are going to go look to like to find their success again.
And yet we're seeing the traffic go the opposite way right now. It's a camp that guys are going to after they've already established themselves, trying to get better. So
I mean, it's still a good camp.
It'll keep him in good fight shape.
Yes, and to a certain extent, like, it has informed his style, and it's an effective style. It just needs some polish.
Yeah. But he definitely, I mean, if nothing else, the dude's a physical bulldozer. He's one of those people that just with chin and power and counter wrestling and a good takedown game, he's going to go a long way just with that. Yeah.
So Zane, I have a question for you now.
Yeah.
Would it be us talking about like prospects that no one's heard of if we didn't come up with some random Russian dude that like 90% of people haven't heard of?
No, of course not.
Of course not. So tell them about our random Russian dude.
Murat Kalimov. I'm not necessarily. I think he's probably a flyweight first and foremost.
Yeah. Yep.
Not
uncommon.
I think in being a flyweight, I'd say more than anything, he probably reminds me of somebody like John Moraga, who it's taken me a lot of time to come around to liking and respecting as a top 5-ish, top 10-ish fighter.
Yeah.
But he seems more than anything like an opportunist. Like, he's got a very good kicking game. He's got a nice, sharp counter boxing game. He's a solid a good offensive wrestler.
Yeah.
And a good submission hunter. But he's not a great defensive wrestler, and he's not a high output striker.
No. And I had him down at number 7, mostly because he wasn't in my top 5 prospects, mostly because of the lack of striking in his game, pretty much at all, defensively or offensively, not very good. But the reason I had him in the top 10 was because of his athleticism, and because when he is wrestling offensively, he has real moments of brilliance where he just touches dudes and they fall over, which in like ACB and like the Russian scene is like not an insignificant thing. For the most part, guys tend to wrestle pretty well over there. He also his mat work, he likes to get creative with ground striking. If he gets around the guard, which is not a specialty of his, and that's again something you see a lot of on the Russian scene, just not a lot of good guard passing happening over there. If he gets around the guard, he's very creative with his ground and pound. One of his first fights, he did like a full Phil Davis and like locked up the cradle and started kneeing the guy's ribs for like the entirety of the first round. And then once he gets into a transition kind of game where he's looking for submissions, he's really, really good there. So he would be one of those guys that I think he could end up being quite good if he got picked up and ended up in the U.S. working with a camp that kind of taught him the ropes of like the North American MMA game. And then if he was able to transition that style to it, then I think he'd be fairly successful. As is, probably wouldn't be super successful in a international level promotion, but would be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it just sometimes with those kind of guys, it really just depends on how good an opportunist he is. One of the big things about his game is how good he is at chaining submissions on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
He is the kind of guy who will look for a rear naked choke, and if he doesn't get it, slide straight into an armbar.
Yeah,
like that's pretty special. That's pretty cool stuff.
That's I think one of the benefits of, and he strikes me as a Sambo guy, just having watched him, like probably one of the weird subset combat sports that they have in Russia. But
Yeah.
One of the benefits of the limited ground time is that you don't rest. You're
Yeah.
always working for offense. And you can see that in a lot of guys, even in MMA, when they get taken down, they kind of have a little moment where they go, shit, I got taken down. Damn it. Like, oh
Yeah.
no. And in a lot of the Russian fights, when you see anyone get taken down, they immediately are trying to lock something up as they fall down. Like, oh, well, I'm getting taken down. Well, I've got a triangle right here, so I'm going to go for it really, really hard and make the first 30 seconds of this guy in my guard, him trying to fight off like a triangle omoplata combo, that even if it doesn't work, then he's kind of wary about getting offensive in my guard again.
Yeah. I mean, and so I do want, a lot of that kind of thing. It really depends on how good an opportunity is. Because, like I say, it reminds me of somebody like John Moraga's game, where you try to take him down and he will jump on a guillotine every time. He's not a good defensive wrestler, but
Yeah.
he will just jump on a submission and he gets them. Being opportunistic gets him wins. And same thing with like Ricardo Lamas, who is also, he's an okay boxer, he's an okay wrestler, he's an okay grappler, but give him an opening and he'll finish the fight.
Yep. Yep. It is becoming more and more. And I actually had a discussion with Ben Tapita, who is formerly a Bloody Elbow, now with Flow Grappling, about a possible idea. We were talking about just the general lack of aggression sometimes you get from guys in jiu-jitsu, and how, like, a lot of the times, one of the things a lot of, like, especially the old school Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructors will do when you're like a purple belt, basically say, like, all right, so now that you've learned the basics, now you got to stop accepting shit. Like, you don't accept that your guard has been passed. You fight your ass off when your guard gets passed. Like, stop taking that me time every time something bad happens and start being aggressive at all times.
Yeah, it's definitely something that, I mean, and that I think is more than anything at the heart of what you see out of guys who really come up doing MMA. What you see out of MMA natives more than anything else
Mm-hmm.
are fighters who fill every space with offense.
Yes, that is for me a long time being one of the things that, like, demarked really high level MMA fighters. That, like, if you go back and watch a George St. Pierre fight, if he is in range to be hitting someone, he is hitting them.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if it's like on the feet with a jab or if they're in the clinch or whatever it is. He never stops hitting the other guy. Like, there is never a moment without offense. For all the talk about, like, oh, GSP's boring and all he does is lay on guys, there was never a moment in his fights where he wasn't putting offense on a guy if he was capable of doing it.
Yeah, well, I mean, his standard, like what was thought of as his lay and pray style, was to stand over somebody, land a couple of really hard ground and pound shots, jump into their guard, put his head down, pop up, and hit a couple of big strikes and big elbows every couple of seconds,
Yep.
and look for something, and then repeat and rinse and repeat the process. Stand back out,
Work his
maybe
knee
let him back
slide,
up.
and when you re-guard, he hit you again.
Yeah,
Like, yeah, no, it's one of those things that is also something I hear a lot about people who go down and train in Brazil, is that that's how it is in, like, the Brazilian schools. That, like, I think I was just listening to an interview with a guy on Open Mat Radio, and he was talking about, like, oh, you pass a dude's guard in US and they kind of relax and they play side control, and, like, so you pass a dude's guard in Brazil and they freak out. Like, they just flip out and start doing anything they can to put you back in their guard.
mm-hmm.
And it's something that in MMA, that attitude is worthwhile because you don't have a lot of time on the ground. You have a lot of time on the ground in a MMA match is 3 minutes. That is a long time in an MMA match. And so you can't be playing like a passive, wait for the other guy to make a mistake style if you're going to be an offensive grappler. You have to be a sprint grappler and go for it.
Yep. So those are two prospects we've highlighted. Both of them are notable for their aggression and and especially on the ground, their constant offense. Luke Sanders is definitely much more like the bullish, stand-up, hard-headed guy.
Yeah.
But both interesting fighters to follow, both relatively young in their career, on the rise, undefeated. So let's take a look now at some of the fights that went on last week real quick. most notable of last week was Bellator 142 Dynamite. Not a ton of prospects on there. Liam McGeary kept winning. I don't know that he's going to beat Phil Davis, but he's still a top of the food chain light heavyweight for anything outside the UFC. And then, honestly, in the UFC would probably be top 10 without much trouble.
Yeah.
And otherwise, I'm trying to remember who was. Adam Piccolotti won. Did not look great in that win, frankly. Got beat up a lot before finally jumping in and going back to his wrestle grappling. But he's got a decent technical striking style, but he just can't, it's obviously not his specialty.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember if there was anybody else. Unfortunately, Carlos Eduardo Rocha got knocked out, but that was a dark bout, so I don't even, whatever. And Bellator 142 Dynamite. Not a lot of prospects to talk about.
We did get a prime example of why the one night tournament isn't really used anymore in MMA.
Yeah,
true. You rarely get a second fight out of. You rarely get you almost never get a one night tournament where someone doesn't get hurt and can't continue.
Yeah. Over in World Series of Fighting, a lot more prospects fought there. No surprises at all.
Nope.
Frankly. Justin Gaethje got another win over Luis Palomino and continues to look like a guy who's going to get beat up a lot in his career. I mean, Justin Gaethje is a great offensive fighter, but I don't know that he'll ever be the kind of defensive fighter that cracks the top 10.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure. He's definitely he embodies right now kind of that brawling striking style where you're actually talking about a lot of people just kind of throw brawler in the term of anyone who kind of likes to plant their feet and throw, but Gaethje doesn't care where he is in the cage at any given time to start slinging shots.
Yeah. His offense is really good. Like, he picks his shots well, he hits hard, he's got fast hands, but his defense is just it's bad. He shells. He likes to shell and then counter off the shell.
Yeah.
And that basically means that he doesn't see a lot of the shots that he gets hit with.
Yeah.
Timur Valiev got a pretty unexciting win over Tito Jones. Nothing really to write home about there. Ben Fodor got a weird win over Roberto Young. Brian Foster beat the piss out of LaRue Burley. That was a fight that Burley should not have taken.
Nope.
And Vagabov went nuts over Brian Grinnell.
Did we not say that he is quite literally pathologically aggressive and is likely now going to get some serious repercussions because this is the World Series of just set a precedent with kicking Husmar Palhares out.
Well, they suspended Vagabov 5 months. And
yeah.
I hope that they let him. I kind of want them to let him keep fighting because he's fun and crazy, but they do have to know that he is a known nut job and will probably end up screwing himself over again at some point in the future.
Yeah, I mean he's done that before. He has done things like that before.
Yep. Oh, and not that it's a major point, but I caught some of Brian Freaku's fight, 7-1 Aussie on the prelims, and he looked really good. He fought really well, looked like a great athlete. Not the best, off his feet maybe, but really powerful striker. So, I don't know. He could be a fun fighter to develop down the road. Over in Titan, I did not watch Titan. So I didn't watch Titan or Bama 22, but I do want to give a brief update on something that I'm excited to see, and I hope it means that he's out of Titan in a hurry and onto the UFC. Andre Harrison beat Des Green.
Yep.
And that's a major feather in Harrison's cap.
Mm-hmm.
Des Green is another, top young fighter who's fought great competition, has been really solid, is right in the same point in his career as Harrison in terms of time spent. But Harrison just seems like he's on a real roll and he's really developing well. He's not a thrilling fighter, but now with wins over Bollinger, Hollaba, and Green under his belt, he has to be taking steps up. He has to be in a bigger pond. So I'm looking. I hope that means big things for him. And then over at Bama 22, we talked about this a little just before, but Tom Duquesnoy fought and did not look great against Brendan Loughnane.
Yeah, I saw some of this card. It was really hard to find in the U.S. Tom Duquesnoy struggled mightily getting inside on Brandon. How do you say his last name?
Loughnane.
He struggled to get inside on Brendan, and big size difference. And Brendan's not an easy fight. I mean, that needs to be made clear. That this was a guy who got one really tough fight in the UFC and did okay with it despite losing by decision, and has been on a run since then. This is a pretty tough regional test for Duquesnoy. And Duquesnoy was at a big size disadvantage. He got beat up in the first round a little bit. We actually saw Duquesnoy get rocked. He ate a really big punch and was on wobbly legs. In the second and third rounds, he was able to work more of his takedown game and a little bit more of his top position, but it was really obvious that Duquesnoy was struggling getting inside on the much taller and longer fighter. And this kind of drove home the idea that at some point Duquesnoy is going to drop to 135. At some point, he's not going to be a featherweight because this was a pretty serious size disadvantage. So it was a lot of people, I feel like, were scoring it against him, because the Bama commentary team was shockingly against Duquesnoy on this. Like, really, really. And they were in Ireland at the time, and so the crowd was really behind Brendan, and the announcers got behind Brendan. Duquesnoy won. I thought Duquesnoy pretty clearly won the last two rounds. Though the third round was fairly close. But Duquesnoy put in his work. He got the win. It didn't look great. So I think at this point he might be best served dropping to 135, doing one 135 fight, and then getting in the UFC.
Yeah.
Other than that, I was going to say Christopher Jacqueline looked pretty good on the co-main event. And then I did not get to see Carl Moore's fight as it was buried on the prelims, and I basically couldn't find it. But apparently he lost in the second round by guillotine.
Yeah, I talked to somebody who was there, and they said that Moore looked fantastic in the first round and basically just got caught in a submission.
So one of those.
Yep.
I mean, in light heavyweight, it doesn't matter that much. He's 5-1, and
yeah,
he could easily go somewhere. I mean, this is his first loss, and it's the prototypical. But from that description, it is the prototypical submission loss.
Yeah, it sounds like the prototypical submission loss, and the guy he lost to was undefeated, and that's what happens. It's not a major setback for him. He just needs to, recognize it, keep going. So that's the Duquesnoy thing. That was really the big story off Bama 22. Like we say, otherwise Moore, somebody we scouted, he lost, and then as you say, Christopher Jacqueline looked good. It'd be interesting to see if he, as another French fighter. The French MMA scene's actually, they're throwing out some good fighters. So
can we give Duquesnoy a quick shout out though, as I was just made aware of on Twitter earlier today by Lucas Bourdon on Twitter that Duquesnoy is rocking a French porn magazine sponsorship. Apparently he's going to be appearing in the magazine. So hey.
There you go. For all you MMA fans who just can't get enough beef in your life,
is there anything more French than that? Like,
I don't know. If he's smoking and and eating a croissant at the same time in it,
wearing a beret.
That's right. Anyway, on that note, I think that covers us for the week. Thanks everyone for joining in. You can find me on Twitter at DZaneSimon. You can find Tom on Twitter at TP_Grant. You can find both of us at Bloody Elbow. And we got the vivisection tomorrow. We just care, don't care. Today we'll probably have a 6th round, and we got another knuckle up and all our normal run of shows. So give us a like over on YouTube, subscribe to MMA Nation, follow us all week to week, and read everything, and like everything, and make sure that you basically pray to us as false idols, and I want absolute debasement of your religious values for me. That's my end goal here. Thanks everyone for tuning in.